everyone. Welcome to week 4. This week we get to do some talk about some theory. This week I want to introduce to you imagined interaction theory. That sounds a little weird, I know. It was actually weird to me when I first came across it. We're going to talk about imagined interaction theory. And this title of the slideshow really is a pretty good example of what it's about: mental representations of interpersonal communication. So we're going to talk about the ways in which we imagine interaction, the ways that we communicate intrapersonally, and how that impacts our interpersonal communication. So I am not even going to hesitate. I am going to get into this, okay? A quick review, though, we began our semester talking about communication and reality and the ways that we produce realities within ourselves and with others when we communicate. Then in week 2, we located intrapersonal communication. At least at the level of meaning making, we talked about sense and perception and how once you get into that level of perception, that's where intrapersonal communication is at. And then towards the end of our screencasts that week, we honed our focus in onto self-talk. So then last week, we talked about the self and intrapersonal communication. We talked about how intrapersonal communication and self-talk work together in the ways that we manage and navigate ourselves internally and with others in the world. We broke down the difference between personality, identity, and the self. Some really great discussions going on there. I'm excited now to get into what we have for week 4. And in week 4, we're focused on this question: how do we operationalize intrapersonal communication? And what operationalize means is, how do we even, so far we've just sort of talked about it as, well, it's self-talk and we just all sort of kind of know that exists, but is there any other operationalization for it? Well, the way that we're going to answer that this week is some theory. So if you've taken an interpersonal communication class, you have definitely, or should have, engaged some communication theory. In my interpersonal communication class, we engage with relational dialectics, we engage with social exchange theory, social penetration theory, and uncertainty reduction theory. So what we're going to talk about this week in the first part of our class is something sort of along those lines. We're going to talk about some communication theory that's linked to intrapersonal communication. So let's dive in. I want to begin by answering first this question. What exactly is an imagined interaction? Because that sounds crazy to me in some ways. An imagined interaction, what is that? Well, let's talk about it. I'm going to be pretty wordy in the PowerPoint today because this is theory. So just follow along and I will explain this stuff as we go, okay? So what is an imagined interaction? Well, an imagined interaction, and by the way, throughout the rest of the PowerPoint, I will be using II to reference imagined interaction, just so you know, okay? So an imagined interaction is a type of social cognition. Social cognition, doesn't that sound weird? And mental imagery grounded in symbolic interactionism. This is all theory speak, okay? And script theory, in which individuals imagine conversations with significant others for a variety of purposes. So maybe in the future I could explain this, but I'm going to skip over symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is a theory. Script theory is a theory. These are the words of the author of the theory. The creator of imagined interaction theory is Honeycutt. And so Honeycutt is here grounding imagined interaction theory within sort of the scope of other used theories in communication, okay? So it's a type of social cognition. So it's cognition that happens, right? So cognition means it happens in your head, you're thinking, but it actually deals with in the realm of the social, okay? And then mental imagery, that makes sense, okay? The thing that's important really for us is this part, where individuals imagine conversations with significant others for a variety of purposes. So whenever we're talking about an imagined interaction, we're talking about an imagined conversation with significant others for a variety of purposes, okay? So One of the things I want to say right off the bat is that when we're dealing with imagined interaction theory, what we're talking about is we're talking about an imagined interaction, not just when you're thinking about something, okay? That might still be intrapersonal communication when you're thinking about something and dealing with that. We've talked about that in week 2, but what we're talking about right now is this theory is about you imagining an interaction, okay? So this is how we operationalize intrapersonal communication, okay? And I'm not going to go into all of this, right? Because the communication is internal and involves dialogues as well as emotional affect. Actually, I will go into it. I read it, I might as well. So here's what happens. What differentiates you just sort of thinking about something, which could still be intrapersonal communication, right? We talked about that. What we're talking about now is we're talking about communication being internal that involves a dialogue. So you within yourself having an interaction. And what we'll talk about when we get to the second slide of this is of what is an imagined interaction is there's you as the speaker and you as the listener and you trying to have that dialogue. That's what an imagined interaction is. And then the other important aspect of this is that there's emotional affect, okay? So this is what's amazing about human beings. Our brains and our bodies are fascinating and provide endless mysteries for us. Not all are mysteries, thank goodness, but you have emotional responses depending on what you're imagining. So what you can do is you're actually capable of having an imagined interaction with yourself. Where you and an imagined other, or depending on what it is, we're going to get into that as we get further into the slideshow. And then you will actually then experience the emotions that you would in person with that person. And so you have this idea of an internal dialogue and emotional affect, okay? And then you can have positive, negative, or mixed emotions depending on what type of interaction you're dealing with, okay? This week you'll be doing a case study imagined interaction in our first discussion board where I'm asking you to kind of have an imagined interaction, and then in our second discussion board you'll actually be processing what that was like to have that imagined interaction, and then in your journal for this week you're going to be writing about a retroactive imagined interaction that maybe continues to pop up for you that you want to work through. Okay, so this idea of emotional affect with these dialogues is going to come into play in our discussions and your journal entry for this week. So wanted to preview that. So here we go a little bit more. Now, your imagined interaction is a type of daydreaming. Okay, that is not a bad thing. Daydreaming can sound bad. It's actually very productive in the ways that we're going to see here, okay? And they have definitive characteristics, which we'll talk about, and serve a number of functions, which we'll talk about, okay? Here are some of the functions, okay? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I actually have stuff at the end of the slideshow on this, but rehearsal, self-understanding, relational maintenance, managing conflict, catharsis, and compensation. I will explain those later in the screencasts, okay? So this is important. An imagined interaction is different from an internal monologue, and it's different from private speech. Internal monologues are self-talk in which an individual talks to themselves. Okay, so you can have an internal monologue where you're just talking to yourself. You know what? Well, I wonder if I should clean my desk first, or I wonder if I should check my email first, or I wonder if I should, run to the bathroom or whatever it is. That's just an internal monologue. Okay. That is what that is. Yeah, we're good here. I want to make sure I've got something else popping up on my computer that you all can't see. Let me pause real quick. Hang on. Okay, I am back. Sorry, I needed to fix that. Otherwise, the little ding for my email was going to start going off, and you were going to hear that as I go through all this stuff. So, okay, so internal monologues are self-talk in which an individual talks to themselves in both the speaking and the listening role. This is where you talk and you listen. You are the sender, you are the receiver. This is what we talked about in week 2. Okay? Um, the internal monologue is speech directed toward the self from the self. That's kind of a cool way of saying you're the listener and the speaker. Private speech is where an individual speaks aloud to him or herself. So it's just a minor distinction. And actually, the distinction between self-talk and private speech really depends on which intrapersonal communication scholar you're engaging. Many of them just call it self-talk. And you can have internal self-talk or outward self-talk. Okay? So let's talk about imagined interaction theory. All right? I've kind of explained what an imagined interaction is. Let's talk about the theory. So here's what the theory is based on. So here's just the common sense idea. It's common in everyday living to anticipate meetings with people that we know we are going to interact with. Easy. Here's an example. You may imagine some of the questions that a job interviewer will ask you and how you might respond. In fact, that's a great idea. Do that. and the interesting thing is even if you answer out loud, it's still an imagined interaction. Okay? So it's useful to do that. Okay? Another example. Sometimes after seeing people, we relive the encounter in our minds as we reflect on what was said or how we could have said things differently. I personally am the worst about getting into a situation and then leaving, and then in 5 minutes finally having the perfect thing to say. Someone might have been being a jerk, or someone may have been trying to be funny, and it, you know what I mean. Whenever you leave a situation and then 5 minutes later you go, "Oh, why didn't I say this thing?" That's an imagined interaction. You had to have that for you to realize that that's what was happening. So it has to do with anticipating or reflecting on a communicative interaction. So these examples, again, are a part of daydreaming, which reflects internal talk. We've talked about that. And I've said this already. They refer to a process of social cognition in which individuals imagine and therefore indirectly experience themselves in anticipated or past communicative encounters with others. Folks, these are Honeycutt's theory words, which is why they're so sort of confusing, okay? So again, social cognition. It's cognition, but you're thinking about something social, okay? You're imagining, and you're then indirectly experiencing yourself in a communicative encounter, okay? Imagined interactions focus and organize your thoughts on communication, on the actors involved in specific acts, and on the communicative context. And so this is one of the things that makes imagined interaction theory interesting, is if we apply imagined interaction theory, we can begin to look at within ourselves and then our interpersonal communication what's actually happening when we do this, because we all do imagined interactions, all of us. So how do they focus our thoughts on communication? How does it focus our thoughts on the actors involved? How does it focus us on the specific acts of communication? And how does it focus us on the specific communication context? These are all really good questions that imagined interaction theory allows us to ask. I've only got about a minute and a half left, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this screencast. I'll see you in the next one.